Their paranoia grows louder each time you walk into a room and do not flinch under their stares. They whisper among themselves, piecing together theories about your calm, as if silence itself is an indictment. They analyze your pauses, your timing, your restraint, and they convince themselves that you are hiding something greater than they can comprehend. The truth unsettles them more than any secret could. You aren't hiding anything. You simply trained yourself not to leak power through nervous chatter. Paranoia fills the vacuum when control slips, and their control has been slipping ever since they realized you no longer respond to their bait. The louder it grows, the more it poisons their alliances. Suspicion spreads like fire among dry wood, burning through their unity and exposing the fragility of the bond they thought was unshakable. Every action you take, no matter how ordinary, becomes a riddle in their minds. If you speak, they assume it carries hidden meaning. If you remain silent, they believe it masks strategy. If you walk away, they think you are plotting. If you stand still, they suspect you are watching everything. Their paranoia grows louder because they cannot comprehend a person who does not need constant validation. They live in a world where every move is made to impress or intimidate, so when you act without the hunger for recognition, they interpret it as evidence of a greater plan. Their paranoia is not a reflection of your actions. It is the echo of their own insecurity screaming back at them, louder with each step you take. Pressure exposes what people are made of, and paranoia is the default reaction of those built on lies. They built their circle on manipulation, thinking they could calculate every angle, control every outcome. Then you arrived and their equations stopped adding up. You didn't argue when accused. You didn't beg when ignored. You didn't panic when pressured. You did the one thing they cannot handle. You stayed calm. That calmness ripped holes in their strategy, and the more those holes grew, the more they suspected sabotage. Paranoia thrives where discipline is absent. They lacked discipline, so all they had left was fear. The louder their paranoia grew, the weaker they looked, because no one trusts a leader who trembles in shadows of their own making. In relationships, paranoia takes on a sharper edge. They wonder why you don't fight to prove yourself, why you don't scramble for approval, why you don't react to their theatrics. Instead of seeing your detachment as clarity, they convince themselves you must be getting validation elsewhere. Their paranoia grows louder with every calm response, with every unbothered silence. They accuse not because you are guilty, but because they cannot live with someone immune to emotional traps. They think loyalty requires dependence, but you show them loyalty without chains. That distinction terrifies them. It makes them believe you have secrets when the only secret is that you built yourself too strong to collapse under manipulation. Friendships suffer the same infection. People who thrive on gossip cannot understand someone who refuses to participate. They look at your restraint and assume you must know something dangerous. The paranoia grows louder in their conversations, twisting into accusations against one another. They start asking, what else has been said? What else do they know? And suddenly their unity fractures. You didn't need to sabotage them. You only needed to hold your ground. By refusing to join their noise, you created an atmosphere of suspicion, so thick it devoured them from within. Their paranoia doesn't just target you. It spreads to everyone near them. That is why their circle always collapses. Suspicion is contagious and paranoia is its loudest carrier. At work, paranoia becomes performance. They monitor your every move, dissecting your results as if they were coded messages. They say you must have an insider feeding you information. They say you must be playing politics in silence. They invent mentors, benefactors, conspiracies, anything to avoid admitting that your discipline is simply greater than their ambition. Their paranoia grows louder with every success you accumulate, because success without visible struggle looks like magic to the unprepared. They cannot believe you are consistent. They cannot admit you simply outwork them. So they invent stories, and those stories betray their own insecurity. The louder they grow, the clearer the truth becomes, that they are afraid of someone who doesn't even need to fight them directly to win. Psychology proves what you've seen play out. Paranoia is not born from logic. It is born from guilt and fear. They know how they operate. They know how much manipulation, betrayal, and shortcuts fuel their lives. So when they see you unmoved, they assume you must be playing the same game, only better. Their paranoia grows louder because they cannot accept the simplest explanation. You are different. You don't need to cheat because you built yourself to endure. You don't need to betray because you learned to detach. You don't need to panic because you trained in pressure. Their projection is their paranoia. They cannot trust anyone because they cannot trust themselves. Enemies live in paranoia more than anyone else. Every time they tried to undermine you and failed, the noise in their head grew louder. They started imagining allies behind you, conspiracies working in your favor, divine forces protecting your steps. They never understood that your advantage was simply foresight, observation, and patience. Their paranoia grows louder because they cannot survive the humiliation of admitting they were outmatched by discipline. They would rather invent forces in your corner than admit you simply refuse to quit. But the louder their paranoia grows, the weaker they become. They spend more time fearing what you might do than executing their own plans. And in that imbalance, they destroy themselves. The cruel part is that paranoia can never be silenced once it takes root. Once they convince themselves you are untouchable, every silence confirms it. Once they believe you know more than you should, every gesture reinforces it. Paranoia grows louder until it becomes unbearable, and then it collapses the very people who nurtured it. You didn't need to orchestrate their destruction. You only needed to hold steady. They handed themselves over to fear, and fear became the rope they strangled themselves with. Their paranoia was not your weapon, but it became your shield. The louder it grew, the less they dared to test you. Their entire structure was built on predictable victims. People who flinched when pressured, people who explained themselves when accused, people who gave away energy just to prove loyalty. You broke that rhythm. You refused to play their game of reaction. And suddenly the moves they rehearsed for years became useless. Their circle thrived on manipulation, yet manipulation only works on those who need approval. You showed them what it looks like to stand detached, to walk away from bait, to act with clarity instead of panic. And the moment you did, the gears of their little machine began grinding against themselves. Without your submission, their power fed on itself until cracks started spreading across the walls they thought were permanent. The downfall didn't arrive in a loud explosion. It came quietly, the way rot eats through wood until one day the structure caves in on its own weight. You didn't attack them directly. You didn't need to. You simply withheld the reactions they expected, and suddenly their schemes collapsed into silence. A circle held together by gossip and drama cannot survive without someone to target. When you became untouchable, the same tactics they used on you turned inward. They turned on each other, desperate to fill the void of conflict, desperate to keep their fragile hierarchy alive. Each rumor they once spread about you became a weapon against their own allies. They wanted your ruin, but in failing to deliver it, they set the stage for their own. Every circle has its glue, and their glue was weakness. They thrived because people around them accepted mistreatment, because fear kept mouths shut, because envy disguised itself as camaraderie. You brought something they had never calculated, strength without noise. You didn't shout. You didn't demand recognition. You simply stood so firmly in yourself that their usual tactics lost their sting. When the usual tricks stopped working, doubt infected their ranks. Leaders began to lose followers. Followers began to lose trust, and whispers of disloyalty spread. They cannot survive suspicion because their entire foundation is deception. When deception meets doubt, collapse becomes inevitable. And that collapse was the only proof you ever needed that you were never the fragile one. Their minds had been trained to win through dominance, not resilience. That is why facing you was so destabilizing. They are masters of smoke, but you learned to see through smoke. They are architects of noise, but you trained yourself to find silence. Their circle was never designed to face someone who would not fold under pressure. They thought pressure would crush you, yet pressure only revealed their dependence on it. You became immune, and immunity is a kind of violence they cannot respond to. When the usual weapons stop working, manipulators always turn inward, desperate to maintain the illusion of control. They devour themselves because they know no other way to survive. In relationships, Your calm dismantled the entire script they had rehearsed. They expected you to chase when they withdrew. They expected you to beg when they withheld affection. They expected you to break when they accused. But you didn't. You let silence hang. You let accusations dissolve in air. You let their need for control expose itself without interference. That lack of reaction destroyed their leverage. Without leverage, they had nothing. And when someone who feeds on power has nothing, desperation poisons everything they touch. That poison seeped into their circle, turning allies into rivals, turning admiration into paranoia. You didn't have to strike. You simply refused to kneel, and the refusal rewrote the balance of power. Friendships within their circle were never built on loyalty, only on convenience. The moment you stepped out of their grasp, their conversations turned against each other. You became the proof they had been faking strength all along. They could not stomach that someone walked away intact. They could not admit that the power they claimed over you was an illusion. So they scrambled, blaming each other, questioning alliances, exposing secrets that were once safely hidden under your shadow. By breaking free, you exposed their fragility. They thought they were predators, but predators who turn on each other are nothing more than scavengers fighting over scraps. Your presence forced that revelation, and once it began, it couldn't be undone. At work, in social groups, even in family dynamics, the same pattern appears. A circle thrives when everyone fears isolation. You dismantled that fear by proving you could stand alone. That proof was devastating to them. Their influence shrank because everyone around them saw the truth. You didn't need their approval, and you still thrived. People who had been silent began questioning the authority of the circle. People who had been afraid began considering their own exits. The fall apart was not just about them losing you. It was about them losing the illusion that no one could walk away. And once that illusion shattered, their circle became a cage with broken locks. Psychology reveals why your resilience dismantled them. Groups bound by manipulation rely on a common enemy. It gives them purpose. It fuels their gossip. It validates their hierarchy. You were that enemy, the one they tried to control, the one they thought they could break. But when you removed yourself from the battlefield, they lost their shared purpose. Without an external target, their energy turned inward. Conflict that was once directed at you became conflict among themselves. This is the cruel symmetry of manipulation. It eventually consumes the manipulators. You didn't need revenge. You only needed discipline, and discipline did the work silently. Enemies fall when they underestimate silence. They saw your calm as passivity. They mistook your refusal to fight small battles as weakness. They thought you were retreating when you were only conserving energy. That miscalculation cost them everything. Because while they exhausted themselves plotting against you, you grew sharper, steadier, more dangerous. By the time they realized you weren't collapsing, their circle was already crumbling. Their strength was a performance, and performances cannot last without an audience. You stopped watching, and the curtain fell. That is why their circle lies in ruin. They performed for someone who refused to clap. They cannot deny you, because your presence lingers long after you leave the room. They can debate your methods, insult your choices, question your motives, but they cannot erase the weight of your impact. People who live off shadows of influence often thrive by erasing others, reducing them to whispers, making them feel invisible. Yet when it comes to you, their strategies collapse. You are too consistent, too unshakable, too visible in your results. They hoped that silence would swallow you, that doubt would cripple you, that exclusion would weaken you. Instead, you grew louder in absence. You became undeniable not because you shouted, but because you moved with clarity, and clarity leaves footprints no one can sweep away. They cannot deny you because they cannot ignore how you stand unbroken after storms that should have destroyed you. Survival has a way of silencing arguments. They wanted to point and laugh, to mark your downfall as proof that you were never built for the weight you carried. Yet every time they prepared the story of your collapse, you gave them a different ending.